She used to call me Mom, with that sweet voice, that gentle smile, and eyes that seemed so sincere. She'd hug me on special dates, compliment my cooking, say I was like a second mother to her, and I believed it. Because when you give your heart to a family, you want to believe in the best. I never imagined that behind that smile was a plan made of lies, manipulation, and something even more cruel, pretending to love me just to slowly erase me. But everything changed the day I walked into the living room unnoticed, and heard enough to never look at her the same way again. The truth hides in the smallest cracks, in the whispers behind walls, in the way conversations stop when you walk into the room, in glances that used to be warm and now look away. That morning started like any other. I made coffee, like always, set the table, washed the dishes, left a note for my son reminding him about his doctor's appointment. The house was quiet. I walked softly down the hall to the living room. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I just didn't want to disturb anyone. That's when I heard her voice. It was low, fast, and nervous. I froze just outside the doorway. My heart skipped a beat when I heard my name. But it wasn't kindness. It wasn't concern. It was cold, calculated. She said something like, "We need to settle this soon. If she stays here, it'll ruin everything. He just needs to sign the papers and put it all in our name." My blood turned cold. Her tone was impatient, almost irritated. Then came another voice. A man's voice. Familiar. Too familiar. Too familiar. "Don't worry. She trusts me. She'll do whatever I tell her." In that moment, I felt my soul leave my body. I didn't want to believe what I was hearing. My mind tried to make excuses. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe it wasn't about me. But deep down, I knew. This wasn't a dream. It wasn't confusion. It was real. They were together, and I was their target. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I slowly stepped back and returned to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, my chest tight and my limbs weak. It wasn't just emotional pain, it was physical. A crushing weight that made it hard to sit upright. I tried to replay their voices, tried to convince myself that I was mistaken. But the truth echoed louder than denial. They had a plan, and I was in the way. I've always been a woman of faith. I raised my children with love, taught them values, gave up more than they'll ever know just to make sure they had a roof over their heads and food on the table. I never asked for anything in return. Just peace, respect, a little love in the final chapters of my life. But that morning, what I received instead was a silent verdict. I was no longer useful. I was a piece to be moved off the board without drawing attention. If this beginning touched you, if something inside you stirred as you listened, then please like this video and subscribe to the channel. That's how we keep bringing real stories to light, stories that reflect what so many people go through but never speak out loud. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever trusted someone who smiled to your face while hiding something dark behind your back? Share it below. Your story could be the wake-up call someone else needs to finally take control of their own life. My name is Tiffany. I'm 74 years old, and ever since I became a widow, I've been living with my oldest son, John, and his wife, Victoria. Moving in with them felt like the natural thing to do. After losing my husband of over 40 years, the house felt too big, too quiet, too cold. John insisted I shouldn't be alone, and Victoria, with that warm smile, told me I'd be more than welcome. I believed her. At first, everything seemed perfect. She called me Mom Tiffany, brought me coffee on slow Sundays, said she admired my strength, and I, still nursing the wound of grief, clung to her kindness like a lifeline. Over time, I began helping with everything. I did the kids' laundry, cooked dinner when they were at work, cleaned the house on weekends, even watched their dog when they traveled. I never complained. Being useful brought me joy. Seeing my family united around me was all I ever wanted. John has always been a good son, a little distracted, sure, but respectful and loving. He worked long hours, came home exhausted, and maybe that's why he didn't notice the little things. Behind Victoria's smiles, behind her sticky notes with hearts on the fridge, something started to shift, but I stayed silent. Victoria never openly disrespected me. She was subtle, extremely subtle. When guests came over, she'd make sure to compliment my energy, but with that surprised tone that cut deep. If I suggested something for the house, she'd thank me and then ignore it. She reorganized my cabinets without asking. She replaced my favorite chair in the living room because it didn't match the decor. Slowly, I realized the space wasn't mine anymore. I was a quiet presence, helpful, but replaceable. She started using words like boundaries and respect with a tone that felt more like dismissal than inclusion. Dinner conversations got shorter. They started making weekend plans without telling me. One time, I came back from the store with ingredients for a special dish, only to find they had ordered takeout. They didn't even mention it. When I asked about it, Victoria laughed and said, "We thought you'd want to rest today." That was always the game, politeness layered with exclusion. Even the grandkids, once so excited to see me, began pulling away. I noticed the exchanged glances between her and John whenever I spoke too long or brought up memories from the past. A quiet awkwardness would settle in, and I learned, slowly, to speak less. Still, I kept trying. I bought small gifts for the kids, baked cakes for birthdays, tried to keep that flame of family alive. But there was something different in her eyes, a calculation, a distance. It was like she was always performing. She smiled with her mouth, but her eyes never joined in. And I, in my motherly naivete, tried to explain it away. I thought maybe she was just tired, or stressed, or bored. But my instincts told me something else. A woman's body may age, but her intuition stays sharp. And something inside me whispered, "Watch, Tiffany, just watch." She began avoiding moments when John and I were alone. Whenever he came home from work, she'd jump into conversation, cut me off when I tried to share something, or steer him away from my words with a gentle, "Let's talk about that later, Mom." Even when my legs were aching terribly, she'd recommend tea and rest, rather than offering a doctor's appointment. All of this built up like thin layers of ice beneath my feet. I kept smiling because that was my armor, but inside, something began to crack. And when the truth finally revealed itself, I was ready. Because those who watch in silence often see more than anyone else. Now tell me in the comments, have you ever lived with someone who pretended to admire you while secretly just tolerating your existence? Share your story below. You never know, your words might help someone open their eyes before it's too late. It started with a single phrase, one careless whisper, an odd glance, and suddenly, my intuition screamed louder than logic. I had been ignoring it for too long, brushing off those flickers of discomfort as imagination. But this time, something shifted. I was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter, when I heard Victoria's voice coming from the hallway. Low, hushed, urgent. She was on the phone, and though I couldn't hear every word, the few I did catch were enough to tighten my chest. "She still has the house in her name," she said. "We can't do anything until he signs over the rights." That word "we," not he, not John, we. I paused, cloth still in hand, trying to process what I had just heard. That's when I knew something wasn't right. From that day forward, I started paying attention, really paying attention. Little things that once felt harmless began to form a pattern. Victoria had always been involved in managing the household, but now she seemed obsessed with every detail of John's finances. I noticed receipts that used to be left on the counter were now tucked away in folders. Conversations between them became coded, full of glances and sudden topic changes whenever I entered the room. One afternoon, I reached into a drawer to get my old checkbook. It was gone. Victoria said she cleaned up some clutter, but it didn't feel like clutter to me. It felt like control. It didn't stop there. One evening, I saw her whispering again, this time not on the phone, but face to face with someone I hadn't expected to see. Daniel, my other son-in-law, my daughter's husband. He was standing in the living room like he belonged there, arms crossed, eyes darting around. Victoria didn't look surprised to see him. In fact, they seemed far too familiar. I watched from the hallway, my heartbeat thudding in my ears, as they exchanged papers and spoke in tones too low to catch. When John came home later, he acted like nothing happened. Either he didn't know, or he didn't want to. After that, Daniel began appearing more often, sometimes when John wasn't even home. I asked Victoria once what he was doing there, and she shrugged, saying he was helping with paperwork for something John had asked them to handle. But I knew my son. John never involved Daniel in his private affairs, and he certainly didn't ask others to manage things behind his back. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. Each day, more signs piled up. My mail started arriving already opened. When I questioned it, Victoria blamed the kids. Then my medical prescriptions were refilled inconsistently. The pharmacist told me someone else had called asking questions about my dosage. I hadn't authorized anyone to do that. I began feeling watched, even in my own room. My phone would ring once and stop. My computer's homepage had changed. I knew they were small things, but together, they painted a picture I could no longer ignore. One night, I couldn't sleep. I walked past the living room and saw Victoria sitting there with a laptop. She was talking to someone on a video call, but when I stepped in, she quickly closed it. The screen flashed for a second. I saw numbers, financial records, my name. When she noticed me, she smiled again and said, "Oh, just checking some recipes." That smile, it was never genuine anymore, just a performance. Daniel came by again the next morning. I watched from the window as he handed Victoria a thick envelope. They spoke in hushed tones on the porch before she came back inside. She froze when she saw me sitting at the table. For a split second, her face dropped. Then she recovered. "He was just dropping something off for your daughter," she lied. But I didn't believe her. I started keeping notes, times, dates, words, movements. I wrote everything down, not just to understand, but to protect myself. They were planning something. I didn't know what exactly, but every instinct in my body told me it wasn't good. And more than that, I was at the center of it. Now I want to ask you something. Have you ever noticed a pattern of small, strange things, and deep down, you knew something was off, but no one believed you? Share it in the comments. Sometimes, the truth isn't in a loud scream, it's in a quiet whisper you choose not to ignore. I walked into the room by accident. I wasn't trying to sneak around or eavesdrop. I had just finished folding some laundry and was carrying a small basket to the guest bedroom when I realized I left my reading glasses on the nightstand. As I opened the door, I froze. Victoria and Daniel were standing close, papers spread across the bed, their voices sharp but low. They didn't see me. I was behind the door, just outside their line of sight. At first, I didn't understand what I was hearing, but then I heard my name. "Tiffany still has the house in her name," Victoria said. "Once we get the signature and that medical report, we'll be able to move everything under Daniel. No red flags." Daniel nodded. "We just need one doctor to confirm mental decline. That's it. Once that's done, she can't fight back." My knees weakened. I sat down, quietly, heart pounding so hard I feared they'd hear it. They were talking about declaring me legally incompetent, selling my dignity for convenience. Victoria was holding a document, my medical file. I recognized the cover. I'd kept it in my personal drawer, the one she claimed she never opened. Daniel pulled out another paper. "This is the draft of the property transfer," he said. "I'll run it through with that lawyer friend of mine. John trusts you. He'll sign anything if he thinks it's to protect his mother." That sentence cut deeper than a knife. John, my son, my boy, being used like a pawn by two people who claimed to care about him. Victoria leaned in, her voice a whisper now. "He's already worried about her memory. I've been planting that seed for months. When she forgets something, I just look at him, shake my head slowly. He's starting to believe it." I couldn't move. I couldn't cry. My breath caught in my chest, burning, shaking. Everything they'd done over the last few months made sudden, brutal sense. The missing bills, the misplaced prescriptions, the strange glances, the exaggerated concern. They were weaving a narrative, not just about my health, but about my capacity. And John, too trusting, too loving, was falling right into it. I stood there for what felt like an eternity before quietly stepping back and closing the door without a sound. They never saw me, but I had seen enough. The rest of that day, I floated through the house like a ghost. Their laughter rang from the kitchen later, casual, as if they hadn't just plotted the theft of a lifetime. John came home and kissed my forehead. I wanted to scream, but I smiled, because I needed time. Time to think, to plan, to protect myself. They thought they were playing chess, but they underestimated the queen. They thought age meant weakness, but they forgot that silence often hides the deepest wisdom. I knew what I had to do, and I had to do it alone. Now, I want to ask you, have you ever overheard something that shattered your reality? Something that changed how you saw someone forever? Share your story in the comments. Sometimes, the truth we aren't meant to hear is the only truth that sets us free. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't confront anyone. I simply went back to my room, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed. My hands were shaking, but my mind was sharp. That's the thing they didn't count on, that I was still lucid, still aware, still very much capable. The betrayal had sliced through every part of me, but instead of falling apart, I began to collect myself, slowly, precisely. They wanted to paint me as unstable, confused, unfit. So I did the opposite. I became silent. I became careful. I became strategic. The next day, I woke up early, earlier than usual. I made breakfast, as always. I smiled. I asked Victoria how she slept. I even complimented her blouse. She smiled back, her usual sugary smile, thinking she still had the upper hand. She didn't know I had already begun building my defense. Every conversation, every whisper, every glance that seemed too calculated, I started recording. I kept my phone on me at all times, hidden in the pocket of my robe or beneath a napkin on the table. When they talked in the hallway, I leaned my phone against the vase near the door. When Daniel came over, I positioned it near the stairwell. I learned how to trim the silence from the audio, how to store files discreetly in the cloud, how to organize it all by date and name. They had underestimated me, and that was my greatest advantage. I pretended to misplace things. I asked simple questions as bait. I even told John, sweetly, I forget so many things these days, just to hear how he'd respond. He looked at me with concern, and that broke my heart. Because he wasn't evil. He was just being pulled in all directions by people he trusted too much. So I knew I had to be smart, for him and for me. One afternoon, I went into town under the pretense of visiting an old friend. Instead, I met with a lawyer I'd known since my husband's passing. His name was Mr. Callahan. Kind, experienced, discreet. I told him everything. I showed him the files. He listened, took notes, asked questions. Then he looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're doing the right thing, Tiffany, and you're doing it brilliantly." I can't describe what that meant to me. Not just his support, but the validation that I wasn't crazy, that I was seen. He advised me to get a full medical examination, psychological, neurological, everything. So I scheduled an appointment that same week, without telling anyone. The doctor, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a calm voice, ran every test. Memory, recall, logic, attention span. I passed every single one. She even smiled and said, "You're sharper than most people half your age." I asked for the results in print, notarized. When I told her why, her expression darkened. "That's elder abuse," she said. "If you need anything else, let me know." And I knew I wasn't alone. Back home, I returned to my role, the quiet old lady, the one who needed help with the TV remote, who sometimes asked the same question twice, just to keep up the act. But behind the scenes, I was building something powerful, a timeline, a pattern, a case. I started writing in a journal every night, summarizing the day. I took photos of receipts, of documents left carelessly on counters. I noticed Daniel's handwriting on some forms that clearly weren't his to touch. I watched as Victoria continued to play the perfect daughter-in-law, but the cracks were starting to show. She got nervous around me. Her jokes became sharper, her glances quicker. She could sense something, but not enough. The day she found me humming in the garden, notebook in hand, she tried to peer over my shoulder. "What are you writing?" she asked. I smiled and said, "Just memories, dear. At my age, you want to hold on to them before they disappear." She laughed, but there was something in her eyes that flickered fear. Maybe suspicion. She didn't press further. I started sleeping better. Because Powell does that. When you reclaim your narrative, when you stop being the victim in your own story, sleep becomes peaceful again. I wasn't planning revenge. I was protecting the truth. I didn't need to shout or accuse. I just needed to wait for the moment when the truth would be undeniable. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever stayed silent while someone underestimated you, only to rise stronger, smarter, and more prepared than they ever imagined? Share it in the comments. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one who listens the most. The day they brought me the papers was the day I chose to end the show. I had spent weeks playing the part, the fragile old woman, the forgetful mother-in-law, the trusting soul who wouldn't dare question anything. But behind the soft voice and warm smile, I was gathering strength, building my moment, preparing for my turn. and when it came, I was ready. Victoria entered the living room with Daniel, both of them holding a folder, pretending to be casual. John was there too, sitting at the table with his usual tired eyes, holding a pen he didn't even know he shouldn't be holding. Victoria smiled. "It's just a formality, Tiffany. A few documents to help us get everything more organized in case anything ever happens." I looked at her, I looked at Daniel, and then I looked at John, my son, the man they had manipulated so skillfully. My hands were steady, my voice didn't shake. "Actually," I said, "I'd like the whole family to be here for this, including Emily." Emily, my daughter, Daniel's wife. She arrived 15 minutes later, confused but concerned. She sat beside me. I stood, walked over to the TV, and connected my phone. "Before I sign anything," I continued, "I think you should all hear something." I pressed play. The room filled with voices, their voices. Victoria's talking about the forged documents, Daniel's explaining how the house would be transferred under his name, the part about faking my mental decline, about convincing John that I was no longer fit to make decisions. There was silence at first, then gasps. Emily covered her mouth. John's face turned pale. Victoria stood up, trying to interrupt the audio, but I raised my hand. "Sit down," I said, and she did. I continued. Screenshot after screenshot of messages exchanged between them, dates, times, even photos of paperwork with Daniel's handwriting. I handed Emily a copy of my medical records, updated, certified, undeniable proof that I was of sound mind. "They weren't just trying to take the house," I said. "They were trying to erase me." Daniel laughed nervously. "This is insane. You're twisting everything. We were trying to protect the family assets, that's all." But his voice was thin now, desperate. Emily stood slowly. "Is that why you were always at her house, behind my back, lying about meetings with lawyers?" She turned to me. "Mom, I had no idea." Then I looked at John, my son. He hadn't said a word. His eyes were filled with tears. "I didn't want to believe it," he whispered. I thought Victoria was helping you." He dropped the pen. "I let them make me think you were losing your mind." I walked over, gently placed my hand on his shoulder. "You trusted the wrong people, but I still see the boy I raised, the one who always protected me. He's in there." His shoulders shook. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." Victoria began to speak again, but no one was listening anymore. The room had shifted. The truth had landed. The silence wasn't heavy, it was clean. Emily walked out, followed by Daniel. John stayed behind, holding the folder they brought. He tore it in half, then in quarters, and dropped it into the trash. "Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever stood silently in a room, knowing you held the truth, while everyone else lived in a lie? Tell me in the comments, because sometimes the most powerful voice is the one that waits for the perfect moment to be heard. The masks always fall, eventually, and when they do, the truth doesn't just come to light, it burns. It sears through illusions and pierces even the deepest forms of denial. That's what happened in my home. Not a stranger, not a distant enemy, but the people closest to me were the ones who orchestrated the slowest, cruelest form of betrayal. And still, I stood. Because survival doesn't always roar. Sometimes, it's quiet, methodical, and rooted in dignity. After everything unfolded, I didn't wait for apologies. I didn't chase redemption in anyone's eyes. I packed my bags, signed a new lease, and left that house, not with bitterness, but with clarity. I moved into a small home in a peaceful neighborhood, surrounded by trees and silence. A place where I could breathe again, where I didn't have to second-guess every smile or every knock on the door, where I was no longer someone's burden or someone's target, but simply myself. The legal protection came quickly. With the help of my lawyer, everything was sealed. My assets were secured. My medical documents placed in official archives. Victoria and Daniel tried to fight back, of course, but they had nothing. No proof, just arrogance. Their manipulation didn't just collapse, it buried them in their own lies. They weren't just exposed. They were erased from the narrative they tried to rewrite. I didn't press charges. I didn't need to. They lost what they wanted most, access to, control, and I regained what I had almost lost, peace. John came to visit a week later. He stood outside my new door with tears in his eyes and a bouquet of flowers in trembling hands. I opened the door and listened. He apologized again and again, told me how ashamed he was, how blind he felt, how sorry he would be for the rest of his life. I looked at him and said, "I believe you, but I need to heal." He nodded, and I gently closed the door. I didn't do it out of cruelty. I did it out of self-respect. Sometimes, forgiveness doesn't mean returning to what broke you. Sometimes, love means letting go, not because the other person doesn't deserve a second chance, but because your heart deserves a second chance at peace. That was the hardest lesson, and I chose to learn it. Surprisingly, someone else began showing up regularly. My grandson, John's son. He'd knock softly on Saturdays, with a book in one hand and a pastry in the other. No words about the past. Just stories, smiles, and time shared in silence and laughter. One day, he said, "Grandma, I don't care what anyone says. I know who you are. I see you." And that was all I needed. One person, one heart, one truth. Sometimes, the greatest victories don't come with applause. They come in quiet moments, with your feet on your own floor, your back straight, your head high, in knowing you were right all along, and that you chose integrity over revenge, clarity over chaos. Now I ask you, have you ever had to walk away from someone you loved deeply, not because you wanted to, but because staying meant losing yourself? Share your moment in the comments. Sometimes, the most powerful transformation begins with a silent goodbye. There are moments in life when everything we believe in gets tested. When the people we trusted most reveal sides we never expected. When the walls we built for protection fall, not because someone broke them, but because we invited the wrong people inside. But here's what I've learned through it all. Faith is not the absence of pain. It is the choice to believe that even in betrayal, there is purpose. Even in the ashes of broken trust, something sacred can grow. I don't believe in accidents. I believe in lessons that arrive disguised as storms. And I believe in the silent strength of those who refuse to let darkness define their identity. When you lose everything you thought was stable, the daily smiles, the shared meals, the voices that once felt like home, you come face to face with the most important question of all. Who are you when no one is watching? For me, the answer became clear in the quiet. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't someone's forgotten mother or discarded relative. I was a woman who had given, who had sacrificed, and who had the right, the duty, to stand for herself when no one else would. And when I made that decision, everything changed. Grace doesn't always look like peace. Sometimes, grace is walking through fire without burning. It's feeling the full weight of loneliness and still choosing to hope. It's knowing the phone won't ring, that forgiveness won't come easy, and still holding your head high. Faith isn't about the absence of fear. It's about walking forward despite it. And in that walk, something beautiful begins to unfold. You start to meet yourself, not the version they knew, the real one, the one who remembers, the one who survived. Every quiet morning in my new home is proof that healing is possible. Every flower on the porch, every breeze through the curtain, every moment of stillness, they whisper one truth: you made it. You walked away from a place that wanted to erase you. And you didn't just survive. You rose. You spoke your truth, and the silence around you shattered. Forgiveness is a journey. Some people may never ask for it. Some don't deserve it. But faith teaches you that letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to carry the weight of someone else's sins. It means opening your hands and your heart to what's next. Because life doesn't end where the pain begins. Life begins where you choose yourself for the first time, fully, without apology. If you've ever stood at a crossroads between silence and courage, and you chose to rise, then you already know, the world may not reward integrity instantly, but your soul will. And that's where true peace lives, not in their approval, but in your alignment with who you were always meant to be. Don't let betrayal shrink you. Let it refine you. Let it lead you into spaces where real love lives, where truth breathes, where freedom rings without chains. If this story touched something inside you, I invite you now, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to this channel. Because here, we don't just tell stories, we reveal truths. And the next story waiting for you, it's even more powerful. It's about someone who disappeared from her family's life, only to return with a revelation that would change everything. Are you ready for what comes next? Then stay close. You're about to witness what happens when silence turns into justice.